Previously, we have looked at two sentence types, simple sentences and compound sentences. In this video, we will continue building different types of sentences in English, in particular, the complex sentence. While simple and compound sentences are fine, you do not want to only use those two types of sentences because it will make your writing boring and repetitive. For example, look at this sentence again. Appropriate communication in the workplace is difficult to pinpoint, and it varies from place to place. Now, look at this one. Appropriate communication in the workplace is difficult to pinpoint because it varies from place to place. Think about how the sentence has changed. Now we can see that there is a dependent clause because it varies from place to place, which depends on the information in the main clause. Appropriate communication in the workplace is difficult to pinpoint. From this, we conclude that the reason that knowing how to communicate appropriately in the workplace is difficult because it changes from place to place. This kind of sentence is known as a complex sentence, and we use these kinds of sentences to indicate a more specific relationship between two ideas. Remember that the goal of technical writing is writing clearly and precisely, so these kinds of sentences are extremely useful. A complex sentence is a combination of one independent clause, which contains the main idea of the sentence, and one or more dependent clauses. Let's talk about this in more detail. To do this, we'll need to recall independent clauses and dependent clauses. As you already know, an independent clause contains a subject and verb, expresses a complete idea, and can stand alone as a sentence. For example, managers are often called by their first names. On the other hand, a dependent clause contains a subject and verb, but does not express a complete thought, and therefore cannot stand alone as a sentence. For example, even if they are the company president. A dependent clause cannot stand alone because they begin with certain words. For example, when you have a concern, the when makes you have a concern into a dependent clause. These words are called subordinating conjunctions. In fact, dependent clauses are also known as subordinate clauses because they start with a subordinating conjunction. What are some other examples of dependent clauses? Well, that depends on what kind of extra information you want to provide. Dependent clauses which act like adjectives are called adjective clauses. For example, instead of saying she created a helpful checklist, you could say she created a checklist which helps us to ensure quality in our work. Some of the words which introduce adjective clauses are who, that, which, whose, when, and where. Or dependent clauses can act like nouns and are called noun clauses. Instead of saying it's important to consider our choices, you could say it's important to consider why we make certain decisions. Some subordinating conjunctions which introduce noun clauses are words like that, if, when, whether, why, how, and what. Or dependent clauses can act like adverbs. Instead of saying, it's important to email the client regularly, you could say, it's important to email the client when you want to give them reports on the project. Some of the subordinating conjunctions which introduce adverb clauses are if, when, as, after, before, even though, because, since, and many more. Please note, in this video we will mainly focus on how to write adverb clauses. Also note that in all of these examples, how specific and detailed the sentence becomes with the addition of clauses. To form an adverb clause, we must add an independent clause to a dependent clause. For example, Look at the dependent clause, while internet usage has increased. To this, we can simply add an independent clause. Cable usage has decreased. Add proper punctuation, and now we have a complex sentence. A few notes when forming complex sentences. The two clauses, dependent and independent, are interchangeable, meaning it doesn't matter which one comes first. However, if the dependent clause comes first, you must use a comma after it to signal to the reader that you have not finished your thought. If the independent clause comes first, no comma is necessary. Adverb clauses are particularly useful because they can provide detailed information to simple sentences, such as time, contrast, condition, cause, effect, comparison, purpose, place, and manner. Let's do a little exercise. I'd like you to match the sentences to the correct type of adverb clause. Try to write the report as I have shown you. We can meet wherever there is a meeting room. The employee regularly worked overtime so that she would be eligible for a promotion. If we hope to be successful, we must learn from previous mistakes. The project was so interesting that they completed it in 2 months. This client is more challenging to deal with than any other client I've worked with. Because it was necessary to identify the values of A, B, and C, this formula was used. After an earthquake occurs, expect aftershocks to follow the main shock of an earthquake. Although the stock market recovered successfully, the unemployment rate remained high. You can pause the video for a minute while you complete the exercise. Ready? Let's check your answers. Now let's look at some other examples of subordinating conjunctions that go with adverb clauses of time: after, until, before, by the time, etc. And how about contrast? While, though, even though, although. Let's look next at condition: if, unless, and even if. How about cause? Since, because, as. And effect: so blank that. Comparison: as blank as, more blank than, less blank than. How about purpose? So that. Place: where, wherever. Manner: as, like. As you can see, clearer and more specific relationships can be established through the use of complex sentences. Now that you know about complex sentences and how to form them, there are a couple of things to watch out for when you are creating them. Look at this sentence. Because the problem was simple, a number of engineers had difficulty finding a solution. Can you spot the error? This sentence does not make sense. Remember that using the subordinating conjunction because makes this an adverb clause of reason. So it doesn't make sense that the reason a number of engineers had difficulty finding a solution was because the answer was simple. A better subordinating conjunction would be even though. So that is the first kind of error, using the wrong subordinating conjunction. How about this one? While rice is the main food crop in Asia, it comprises only 5% of total crop production in Europe. Did you find the mistake? The writer forgot to add the correct punctuation. Remember that a complex sentence requires a comma when the dependent clause comes first. This is an error in punctuation. Okay, here's another one. Since the government decided to cut spending by approximately 3% in October, this often happens when the dependent clause is long. Despite its length, this is still not a complete sentence. Remember that it needs another independent clause to make this a complex sentence. Sentences which do not express a complete thought are called sentence fragments. Lastly, because the number of orders tripled, so production has been immediately increased. In this sentence, you cannot add the conjunction so. Remember that we use conjunctions to join two independent clauses. In a complex sentence, there is one dependent clause and one independent clause. Therefore, we cannot use the word so. This is an incorrect way to add a conjunction. But in the next lesson, we talk about how we can do this in the correct manner. And that's it. Now you know how to write simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. In the next lesson, we will cover the final sentence form, compound complex. Thanks for watching.